Welcome to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church and our live stream worship service. I'm Reverend Pippin Whitaker and I'm your minister. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Accotink UU Church is a welcoming and inclusive community. We seek to create a more just and compassionate world through our actions to bring about justice and by honoring the web of nature of which we are a part. All are welcome here in this justice-seeking, earth-healing community of faith. You're welcome no matter whom you love, no matter your identity or your heritage, no matter your beliefs or your background, no matter your means or your abilities, you are welcome here in this religious community. We also welcome the ancestors and the descendants. We welcome the people who made each of us possible. The biological ancestors, our spiritual ancestors, teachers, and guides. We welcome those who imagined and made our congregation possible. We welcome the ancestral people of the land, and we recall that our church, like Olive Burke, rests still on the unceded territory of the Manahoic tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing with the people of this land, whose bodies and spirits live on in their descendants, many who are members of the Monacan Indian Nation and the Patawomeck Indian Tribe of Virginia and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move towards healing so that all the descendants together shall one day know full justice. And with this, let us welcome the longings and hopes of all the descendants that we might live for them in this day. I now invite John Long, our worship associate, to continue our welcome.
If you're new to Accotink and would like to talk more about this church, please be sure to reach out to me or to Minister Reverend Pippin or a member of the board. Contact information is posted on our website at www.accotinkuu.org. On our website, you can also check the online order of service on the worship section. And while you're there, check the events page for upcoming virtual gatherings and other news. I now invite you to close your other windows or apps and devices, take a deep breath, and center yourself for worship.
Chief Seattle delivered a speech in 1854 to respond to the American government's land treaty to buy their native lands. In part, he said, "Yonder sky that has wept tears of compassion upon my people for centuries untold, and which to us appears changeless and eternal, may change. Today is fair. Tomorrow it may be overcast with clouds."
Chief Seattle said, "Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. And all things are bound together. All things connect." I invite you to light your own chalice or participate with me in this chalice lighting.
Let us gather, friends, gather our hearts and minds for a time of prayer, of meditation. Take a breath. There are so many troubles this week. Let us try to find a moment where we can set them down, not far from us, because they're too heavy, these burdens, but perhaps just imagine someone sitting next to you and let your burden rest just between you. The Chauvin trial continued. Dante Wright's murder. The news of Adam Toledo. The shooting in Indianapolis. I could go on and on. But we need to take a moment to give ourselves a little breath. Let us know we are in company, in good company of this community. Take a breath and know your troubles are worthy, and we can have a little space to breathe together. One more breath, a little bit of ease in your heart.
Our reading today is In the Spirit of Indigenous Traditions, written by UU Minister Reverend Vern Barnett. Infinite Spirit, sometimes called Grandfather, Grandmother, Father Sky, Earth Mother, Creator, we gather to praise your creation, to honor the swimmers and crawlers, the four-leggeds and the winged ones. We give thanks for the beauty and glory of creation and open our hearts to new ways of understanding our place in the universe, not the center or focus, but a humble, balanced place where every step we take becomes a prayer, where every word we say makes harmony with the vast, vibrating cosmos, and where we know we are singing the song of life. We pray to know more deeply that we are in the garden where every plant and animal and speck of dust is a living prayer. Without our brothers and sisters of the plant and animal and mineral kingdoms, the human family would end. So we want to bless them as they bless us. We pray for humility, not humble ourselves before presidents or priests, but before the ants and the trees. For if we cannot be in true relation to the ant, we shall be outcasts in the garden. Let us cast the pollution from our eyes so we can see the glory and live with thanksgiving. Great Spirit, let us remember it's not how we talk, but how we walk. When we say we love the animals, let's protect them. When we say we love the plant people, let us honor them by living lightly on the earth. When we say we love the minerals, let us use them only in necessity and remember their rightful place. Oil belongs in the ground, not in the air through our wasteful machines. Wondrous trees, breathing life into the atmosphere, your gifts of fire and shelter, fruit and sailing are precious to us. In many ways, you offer us the leaves of knowledge. May the vision of mutual interrelatedness, cosmic interdependence, and the seamless process of generations not end in cough-filled skies blotting the sun, but rather in clean air, healthy forests, wholesome water, expansive prairie, and the pungent earth, nourished paths for all creatures through the mountain and the valley and the salt sea. Through the protective atmosphere, we rejoice in the inhabitants. Hear and empower our mantra, reduce, reuse, recycle. With thanks for the surprise and mystery for it all, we pray in the name of the Creator, the processes, the presences, and all our relations.
This Earth Day, I am inspired to change a story. As I reflect on the beautiful words of our land acknowledgement, welcoming all, I also reflect on how little our education teaches us about the people whose land we're on. We're on the land of the Manahoic, with near relations to the Monacan. And while I grew up learning of the indigenous people in New York, the tribe names, and after the tribe names, the story was much the same. There really wasn't much of one. It was like they magically disappeared and like they're all gone. Now, today I want to challenge that story of erasure. The people of the Manahoic didn't die out, and they aren't all gone. When there weren't enough individuals to sustain tribal life, they merged into several of their neighboring tribes. And most importantly, they're still here. When we honor and acknowledge where this land came from, we honor them and their stories. It is a story all too often untold. I reflect on the story of climate change, inspired by the documentary This Changes Everything by journalist Naomi Klein in 2015. Telling the story of global climate change, the documentary invites us to consider, if you plan to stay in a place forever and your entire culture and history are here, how does that change your worldview? Crystal Lehman of the Beaver Lake Cree Nation is fighting for her tribal nation's rights under Treaty 6 with the Canadian government to share the land with the Beaver Lake Cree as long as they can live, hunt, and fish and forage. The Beaver Lake Cree don't believe in land ownership. They believe that the land owns us and that we can share the land with you. Crystal is a powerful Indigenous leader of her tribe's efforts to stop future tar sands expansion. environmental destruction, and to enforce their treaty rights for as long as the grass grows, the sun shines, and the river flows. I invite you to imagine that, a commitment to where you live and are, for as long as the grass grows, the sun shines, and the river flows. What a powerful story. This isn't just a Canadian thing. Montana farmers Alexis Bonkowski and Mike Scott tried to farm sustainably and work with the Northern Cheyenne tribe fighting fossil fuel extraction near Yellowstone National Park. An oil spill of 750 to 1,000 barrels of oil made farming impossible. The Yakama Nation supported the fight to prevent the strip mining of the land, and Vanessa Braided Hair of Eco Cheyenne is an eco-activist who called informal public meetings protesting the actions of Arch Coal in Montana. Another Indigenous leader, Henry Red Cloud of the Lakota Star Solar Enterprises, has the dream that the First Nation peoples will be energy independent prior to mainstream America. His vision honors the life-giving power of the sun, which is such a strong and central part of the Lakota culture. The documentary also references sacrifice zones as the description of the destruction that happens where we extract fossil fuels. However, the term doesn't describe two vital things: that sacrifice zones continue to grow, and the people that live there are sacrificed too. That conflicts with our values, and that is a story that I can't support and have to work to change. I hold this in contrast to the story I remember being told of humans as naturally destructive to our environments, and that since we do not physically adapt to our environments to survive, we have to use our gifts of intellect to change and subdue the environment to fit our needs. Our gift of intellect is to turn the earth into a machine to make what we want. I remember learning those stories and holding those two stories in my hands and in my head and in my heart. I've begun to wonder, what if we tell a different story? We can tell the story of caring for the earth, of living locally, sustainably, and in balance with the natural world. What if we tell the story of stewardship, the story of caring for the earth like the only home we have, and see it as if we will live here forever? The story of caring for her like a life-giving mother, the story of living as one type of animal with room for many others. As we do this work, we find allies with Indigenous people, we find allies with small farmers, and see the destruction of the fossil fuel. We even find allies with people who've seen the destruction of the fossil fuel extraction firsthand and have come to long for a better way of life. As simply as changing a story from exploration, extraction, and destruction to the story of stewardship, sharing, and restoration, we find we can make a difference. The sense of overwhelm can lift, and we can find preservation and healing the land is not an Indigenous issue, it's a human issue. It's a global issue. What can we do? Native plants can make a difference. Biking when we can drive can make a difference. When we look at bigger things, living may be hyper-local, and we may honor the plants and animals and webs of life that live and thrive in the environment around us. When we pull this all together, today of all days, on this Earth Day, I want to tell the story of the interconnected web of life of which we are a part. May it be so.
Hi, I'm Joanne. Could we have our first slide for this segment, please, Ali? In any region, a crucial element of the web of life is the native plant population. Native plants and animals co-evolve with the conditions in each site to become interdependent food webs. There's also a phenomenon called species-specific needs, and we're all familiar with this from the monarch butterfly. Monarch butterflies are totally dependent on the milkweeds of a particular locality for the survival of their eggs and caterpillars. Without that native milkweed, monarch flocks that migrate between here and the Caribbean decline. But the monarchs aren't the only species that need that kind of specific species to co-evolve with. Entomologist Doug Talame from the University of Delaware reels off a long list of insects that only eat one native plant in their region. Talamay tells us that we can no longer think of plants as lawn decor, but we have to think of them as biodiversity services. And we're at the point in history where we have to supply this diversity, because in many open spaces, even in nature preserves, exotic plants have been introduced and pushed out our natives. Next slide, please. Here's something Accotinkers are doing about this. This is a Joe Pye weed, and you can see its leaves have been eaten by probably many of the 41 caterpillars that depend on the Joe Pye weed. And as those caterpillars grow, they feed native birds. As the birds mature, they eat the seeds that are going to mature. This plant is from September 1st. So that's an elegant system that feeds a lot of the bird life cycle. Next slide, please. Here's another plant we love. We put it next to the chalice fountain, and it's called Indian pink. It's named for the color of its roots, but you can see these red and yellow flowers are each a hummingbird feeder. Next slide, please. Here's a colonnade of trees in the median of Lake Braddock Drive that I have just adored. I love driving through this in the spring as they flower, and I've done it for 30 years. But the problem is that Bradford pears are highly invasive. And next slide, please. Here they are across Burke Road from the Shell station, where they've invaded this empty lot. And these form dense root mats, and they have long thorns on them, so they become very expensive and difficult to extract. As UUs, we have our seventh principle of respect for the interdependent web of life. Planting and cultivating native plants on our church property and in our home gardens is a real way that we can live this principle and make real changes. First of all, we can plant natives to support animal life. It's entertaining to have that bird feeder in your yard, but unless you're supporting the baby birds with those high calorie, low fiber caterpillars, our bird counts will continue to decline. Native plants also support pollinators. That's a big problem, and we can help ensure a future food source for ourselves by supporting pollinators. Planting native shrubs and trees sequesters more carbon from the atmosphere than using a lawn. And that's an important thing for global warming. Oaks are the most important tree to plant. Oaks in this area, white oaks are our native species. They support hundreds of native animals. Gives new meaning to our hymn, We'll Build a Land, with that line, like oaks of righteousness stand her people. The native plant movement is also an enormous economic boon to locally and family-owned garden centers and nurseries in our area, many of which hire lots of folks who are newly immigrated. So there's an economic plus to this. Talamay tells us that if we converted, each of us, half of our lawns to native plants, we could create a chain of nature preserves over 20 million square acres large. That's larger than scores of national parks put together. It would be the largest environmental project on Earth. And finally, native environments reduce stress for us humans better than exotic gardens. So folks, land ownership is now more than just a privilege, it's a responsibility to preserve native ecosystems, at least as much as that's practical. And as UUs, we should support native plants.
Hi, I'm Mary Rose, and I want to ask, how do we live in right relationship with the land and honor the ancestors who lived here? as Catherine Adams talked about. We can change how we view the land, moving from an attitude of dominating the earth to respecting and nurturing the land as shown by Indigenous people. And as Catherine described, many Native activists are leading the fight against climate change and against the destruction of forests, rivers, and mountains, even at the risk of their own lives. And as Rev. Pippin will share later, the climate crisis is leading some to feel despair. The forces supporting climate denialism and the continued use of fossil fuels seem too powerful. It seems like we as individuals really can't do anything. But that's what those forces want you to believe. Think of Greta Thunberg. She started out simply, a girl with a sign saying climate strike, skipping school on Fridays by herself to protest the destruction of her future and the future of the earth. But look at what a difference she's made. Of course, we can't all organize and participate in protests, but we can do something, even just one seemingly small thing to protect the earth. Marcia has prepared an excellent resource list, which is in the chat, and it's also in a link is also in this week that you can use, download and use, and study to figure out what you would like to do individually, and also what can we do together. Joanne talked about the importance of planting native plants, both on AEUC grounds and in our home gardens. You can turn part of your lawn into a native wildflower garden. You can make room for an organic garden and use your compost. You can avoid the use of pesticides that kill bees and other pollinators, and harmful herbicides like Roundup and artificial fertilizers that wash into our waterways and ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. Even if you don't have a yard, you can grow your own organic vegetables if you have a patio or a balcony, and you can add a few native wildflowers too. You can shop at farmers markets or join local CSAs. You'll be eating healthier vegetables and helping to protect the land. So what is one thing that you can commit to? Maybe it's composting instead of throwing vegetable peelings into the trash. Maybe it's reducing your carbon footprint by biking more and driving less. Maybe you can reduce the amount of trash you generate by buying fewer things packed in plastic. Maybe you can commit to several meatless meals per week, as livestock farming contributes to climate change. You can write or call your elected representatives to support environmental initiatives. You can join and donate environmental organizations. And the Green Team at AEUC needs your support too. Join us if you're interested in helping to green our church community. We're currently investigating how we can solarize the church. If you have expertise in this area, please contact us. Imagine how exciting it would be for AEUC to reduce our own carbon footprint and provide a shining example to other church communities and homeowners in the area. Yes, it will take commitment and effort, but now is the time. The climate crisis demands action. The land and all living things are in trouble. Let us respect and care for the land and the earth. Let it guide your voice, your vote, your shopping, your gardening, all of your living. May you be an example to the people around you. May this Earth Day 2021 be the start of a new story about our relationship to the earth, when we learned from our Indigenous brothers and sisters and began to turn things around. May we be part of this story.
As we close, I offer a reflection on climate grief and how we grow through it. Have you watched the television series Nature, narrated by David Attenborough? I loved it as a child, and I was also saddened by it. Attenborough would narrate the lives of animals, and I was heartbroken when the zebra or wildebeest would fall prey to the lion. And yet I learned to embrace this part of life. I could embrace it because it was part of a cycle that ebbed and flowed within an ecosystem that fed the lions and the cheetahs, as well as the buffaloes and giraffes. I learned to lean into grief and explore what is possible there. Back then, what was possible was for me to learn compassion for all life, Because I was open to my emotions, I was able to become more mature and more attached to nature. Today, we are again invited to lean into grief, to be open to what is possible. But David Attenborough's story has changed. In his recent versions of Nature, Attenborough tells us in that familiar tone how nature teeters on the edge of catastrophe. With heartbreak, I watched as he narrated the last moments of walruses who, lacking ice to rest on, find themselves overcrowded on a small cliff. I watched in horror as they toppled over the cliff edge and crashed to their deaths. And I knew my life has been part of this. Even in a small way, I've contributed to global warming. Why would Attenborough tell this sad story in the same familiar tone? Because we are invited. We are invited to lean into this grief. This time not to accept a cycle of life, but instead to stop the downward spiral. There is always possibility, a creativity waiting to be realized amidst grief and change if we can lean into it. Doing that, leaning into our grief over the loss of life and ecosystems and our collective future that is brought on by the climate crisis, we must grapple with the ways we each have played some part in it. It is hard work. In The Wild Edge of Sorrow, psychotherapist Frances Weller explains that our power to live through grief has in our society been stunted because our dominant culture prescribes amnesia and anesthesia for the discomfort of grief. Confronted with grief and sadness in our lives, we're offered anesthesia. We're taught to self-medicate, to consume, that buying something or eating something will cover up the sadness. And we are taught to move on, to cultivate amnesia, to forget the genocide against the First Nations and the pillage of the land, to forget all the painful parts of our history. But Weller says, all of this cover up robs us of the thing we need most, the thing that allows us to go on as whole beings. We need to embrace our grief, become one with the soft ground of loss, and only then will we grow new roots and support new life. We need the capacity to embrace our grief. Grief is uncomfortable and hard, but hiding from it will never heal. Part of the power and the hope of leaning into climate grief now is that we still have the power to avoid the worst of it. Embracing grief allows us to be fully present to life at its most defining moments. In the book, The Five Invitations, Frank Ostaseski points out that the invitation to be present fully to life is always waiting for us, always inviting us in. And it is when we finally embrace our mortality that we are then able to fully enjoy the phenomenal miracle of life and what we mean here. Life is always inviting us into this truth, and I'm learning to accept the invitation into climate grief and into my own grief and loss. As we do each week, we extinguish our chalice. And as we do this, we do not extinguish what we have meant together in this moment or ever. We carry within us every moment, every inspiration, every tense time, every laughter. Let it inspire us. Let it cajole us to be our bravest, best selves and shine radiantly out in the world. John, won't you lead us in our community blessing?
I invite you now to join me in our community blessing with these words of David Bombau. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one. and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.
No matter where we find ourselves on this planet, together in a sanctuary, together online, and even further apart than that, we are all together in this. You and I, we are forever woven into the interdependent web of existence. We are called on a mission to heal Earth, to bring justice and equity, to build beloved community for all beings, and to nourish ecosystems. We do this together, and in this we are always bound as one. Let us keep the words of Jane Goodall in our hearts and actions. Quote, "You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make," she said. Let us make our difference be love. Amen.